Have you ever reached that moment in your life where you suddenly feel the atmosphere shift? Where something deep inside you whispers that the way you have lived, believed, and understood yourself is far smaller than what God has placed within you? That is the moment everything changes. That is the moment when the Spirit begins to reveal the mystery that has been hidden from the ages, Christ in you. It does not come quietly. It comes like a fire breaking open the walls of your old limitations. It comes like a voice calling you out of your excuses, your fears, your smallness. And when this revelation touches you, you can never return to the version of yourself that lived unaware of this holy indwelling. Something begins to rise inside you. The sense that heaven has been waiting for you to awaken. When the revelation of Christ in you dawns upon your heart, the first thing it confronts is the lie that you are alone. For years, you may have walked thinking God was distant, unreachable, speaking only through signs, prophets, or moments of spiritual height. But when this mystery unfolds, you realize God never lived far outside your reach. He has been closer than your own breath, nearer than your pulse, dwelling in the deep chamber of your spirit. This awareness begins to overthrow every form of isolation that tried to imprison your identity. You stop praying like a beggar knocking on heaven's door, and begin moving like a son or daughter walking with the authority of the indwelling Christ. There comes a stirring inside you, a boldness that was not there before. It is not the boldness of personality or confidence learned from the world. It is the boldness of knowing that the Lion of Judah is alive within you. Suddenly, fear begins to lose its power. You find yourself standing where you used to tremble, speaking where you used to stay silent, stepping where you used to hesitate. This is not emotional hype. This is divine identity awakening. Christ in you does not merely inspire courage. He becomes your courage. He becomes your voice, your strength, your fire. You begin to sense that weakness is no longer a disqualification. It is an altar where His strength manifests. Once this revelation takes root, you start to notice that the battles you thought were external were actually shaped by something internal. The enemy's greatest weapon was never the problem in front of you. It was the ignorance within you. He does not fear your church attendance, your religious routines, or even your spiritual disciplines. What he fears is the day you realize who is living inside you. The day you awaken to the presence of Christ within is the day hell loses its grip on your mind. You begin to recognize that victory is not something you chase, it is something you carry. The war shifts. You stop fighting for breakthrough and begin fighting from breakthrough. When Christ in you becomes real, your prayers transform. They stop sounding like desperate attempts to convince heaven to intervene and begin flowing like declarations of a king who knows heaven is within him. You pray with authority, not anxiety. You speak with clarity, not confusion. Your words take on weight because they are no longer rooted in self-doubt but in divine partnership. You realize prayer is not you reaching up, it is Christ reaching out through you. This realization changes the atmosphere around you. It shapes your thoughts, your environment, and every assignment God sends your way. Many people spend their lives asking God to use them, never realizing that the true key is not asking but awakening. When Christ in you becomes your revelation, you stop waiting and start moving. You discover that God does not anoint statues but vessels. He does not empower the ones who only dream. He empowers the ones who dare to step with Him living inside them. Suddenly, opportunities you once feared become missions you embrace. You walk into rooms carrying answers heaven deposited within you. You stop wondering if you are worthy and begin recognizing that it is Christ in you who qualifies your calling. There is a purity that rises when this mystery unfolds. Not the purity of forced discipline, but the purity that comes from understanding that your body is a dwelling place of glory. Sin loses its attractiveness not because you fear punishment, but because you recognize your identity. You start to guard your heart, your mind, your choices, not out of religion, but out of honor for the one who lives within you. Christ in you reshapes your desires until holiness becomes your natural expression. You begin to live not from rules but from revelation. And then comes the unmistakable transformation in how you face suffering. Trials no longer convince you that God is distant. Instead, they reveal the strength of the Christ who is within you. You stop crying out for escape and start walking in endurance, because you realize storms are not evidence of abandonment, but opportunities for the indwelling Christ to reveal His power. You begin to see that every valley becomes a place of testimony, every fire becomes a place of refinement, and every battle becomes a stage for the glory inside you to be manifested. Your relationships change next. When Christ in you becomes your living reality, you no longer demand from others what only God can give you. The emptiness that once made you cling to people, fear rejection, or seek validation begins to dissolve. You carry completeness, not neediness. You love from overflow, not deficiency. You forgive quickly because Christ in you keeps your heart soft. You lead with compassion because His Spirit shapes your responses. You stop measuring your worth by the reactions of people, and start measuring it by the presence within you. A sense of mission begins to burn inside you. Christ in you is not passive, He is purposeful. He is always moving towards someone, reaching someone, healing someone. When you awaken to His presence within, you start seeing people differently. Their pain matters. Their struggles touch you. Their brokenness calls out to the Christ in you. You find yourself speaking words you did not rehearse, giving comfort you did not script, offering wisdom you did not study. This is the Spirit of God manifesting through your humanity. Your mindset becomes the battlefield where the greatest transformation happens. When Christ in you becomes your identity, your thoughts no longer run wild with fear or doubt. You begin to discipline your inner world, not through force but through revelation. Thoughts of defeat are challenged by the Spirit within you. Thoughts of inadequacy are confronted by the truth of His indwelling power. You start recognizing that every negative thought is an intruder, not a resident. Your mind becomes a place of peace, clarity, and divine alignment. You begin to hunger for the Word of God in a new way, not as information, not as routine devotion, but as a mirror that reveals the Christ within you. Scriptures that once felt distant suddenly burn with meaning. They speak directly to your spirit. You read promises not as poetic encouragements, but as legal declarations of your identity. You start to understand that the Word is not merely a book. It is the voice of the Christ who lives in you, shaping you, guiding you, awakening you. Your worship becomes fire, not because the music changes, but because you change. Worship is no longer something you offer to a distant throne. It becomes a communion with the Christ who dwells within. You worship from spirit to spirit, from heart to presence. In those moments, you feel heaven move inside you, and worship stops being a moment in your week. It becomes the atmosphere in which your spirit breathes. The revelation of Christ in you reshapes your destiny. You stop settling for average. You stop shrinking yourself to fit small expectations. You begin to sense heaven's blueprint for your life. Dreams that once felt impossible suddenly feel inevitable. Why? Because Christ in you is not dreaming. He is leading. He is revealing the path heaven designed long before you ever took your first breath. You begin to walk in divine alignment, confident that your steps are guided by the one living within you. And finally, you come to understand that Christ in you is not a theological concept, not a poetic phrase, not a spiritual metaphor. It is the greatest truth ever entrusted to humanity. It is the glory that transforms ordinary people into carriers of heaven. It is the power that breaks chains, heals hearts, and calls you into a life far greater than the one you planned. When this revelation becomes your reality, you will never again see yourself as small, weak, or insignificant. You will walk as one chosen, empowered, and indwelt by the living Christ. There comes a moment when you realize that the Christ within you is not waiting for a perfect environment to manifest His power. He is not limited by your background, your education, your surroundings, or your past wounds. He shines brightest in places where you once felt the weakest. And when you grasp that, something astonishing happens. You stop waiting for conditions to improve before stepping into purpose. You stop waiting for every flaw to disappear, every challenge to calm down, every insecurity to fade. You start moving forward boldly because you finally understand that the power working through you is not fragile. It is heaven's own strength operating in a yielded vessel. And when a yielded vessel moves, heaven moves with it. As this revelation deepens, you begin to notice a shift in the way you handle temptation. You no longer fight it as someone battling alone in the dark. You confront it with the awareness that Christ Himself stands within you. You do not resist sin with human willpower. You resist it with divine identity. The old desires that once overpowered you begin to loosen their grip, not because you suddenly became stronger, but because the Christ in you is finally being recognized, honored, and given authority in your decisions. You begin to see that temptation loses its strength when identity takes its rightful place. You stop trying to win battles that Christ already conquered. Your past no longer dictates your future when this truth becomes alive within you. The shame that once silenced your voice starts to crumble. because the Christ in you refuses to let your history define your destiny. You recognize that redemption is not just something God gives. It is something He becomes inside you. You stop reading your story through the lens of regret and start seeing it through the lens of grace. Every failure becomes a testimony of God's rescue. Every weakness becomes a platform for His strength. Every wound becomes a doorway for His healing. You begin to walk with your head lifted, not because your past was perfect, but because Christ has rewritten the meaning of your past. Understanding Christ in you changes how you see spiritual warfare. You no longer imagine yourself as a fragile believer constantly under attack. Instead, you see yourself as a carrier of divine authority. The enemy doesn't fight you because you are weak. He fights you because of who lives within you. And when you realize that, fear loses its voice. You begin to speak with authority. You command what once controlled you. You break what once bound you. You stand firm because you know the one who conquered death is dwelling inside your spirit. Spiritual warfare stops being a struggle for survival and becomes a declaration of victory. Your inner conversations transform dramatically. Where once your thoughts echoed with self-doubt, insecurity, and confusion, now there is a quiet confidence that shapes your decisions. You stop arguing with yourself about whether you are enough. You stop rehearsing every mistake. You stop imagining worst-case scenarios. Instead, your mind becomes a resting place for truth. You begin to hear the echo of His voice within. Words of courage, peace, clarity, and direction. You find yourself thinking thoughts you never had before. Thoughts born from the Spirit who now governs your inner world. This mental transformation becomes one of your greatest testimonies. Christ in you releases a new level of compassion that cannot be faked. You start feeling the weight of people's pain, not as a burden but as an invitation to manifest the heart of Jesus. You notice the ones others overlook. You care for those society ignores. You listen when you used to rush. This is not soft weakness. This is divine strength clothed in tenderness. When Christ in you becomes a living reality, love stops being a Christian concept and becomes the driving force of your life. You find yourself doing acts of kindness without effort, because His nature begins to flow through your personality. When you understand Christ in you, you begin to realize that insecurity is an illusion built on ignorance. You were never meant to measure yourself by comparison or competition. The divine purpose inside you is unique, irreplaceable, and crafted before time. You stop envying others because you finally recognize the treasure within yourself. You stop feeling threatened by someone else's success. Instead, you celebrate it. You stop shrinking in the presence of confident people. Instead, you stand tall knowing that your worth is not borrowed but inherent, because Christ Himself lives in you. There is a powerful shift in the way you handle disappointments. They no longer break you the way they used to. You stop interpreting every closed door as rejection and start seeing them as redirection. You understand that Christ in you is not limited by obstacles. He uses them. He transforms setbacks into setups for greater purpose. What once discouraged you now develops you. What once weakened you now strengthens you. You start to say, if God allowed this, then Christ within me will use it. And with that mindset, disappointment loses its power to derail your destiny. Your sense of identity grows deeper and more unshakable. You no longer draw your value from titles, recognition, possessions, or achievements. Maturity develops inside of you. Your confidence becomes rooted in something eternal, not temporary. You begin to understand that Christ in you is the anchor of your identity, the foundation beneath your feet, the reason you stand tall in every season. People's opinions stop controlling you. Circumstances stop defining you. Failures stop labeling you. Your identity becomes rooted in the one who cannot be shaken. As this revelation expands, your creativity begins to unlock. Ideas flow where there was once dryness. Inspiration rises where there was once stagnation. You begin to think beyond your limitations, because the creative Christ within you awakens solutions, visions, and strategies. You begin to see possibilities others overlook. You speak ideas that feel too big for you, and that is how you know they are coming from Him. Christ in you becomes the fountain of innovation, giving you the courage to build, create, and pioneer what never existed before. Your daily walk takes on a supernatural rhythm. Ordinary moments suddenly feel sacred. You sense His presence during simple tasks. You feel His guidance in small decisions. Life no longer feels divided between spiritual and normal. Everything becomes spiritual, because Christ is in everything you do. You begin to move with divine awareness, hearing whispers of direction where you once heard only noise. You walk slower, but with more purpose. You speak fewer words, but with greater weight. You live not rushed, but aligned. There is a new confidence in how you approach opportunities. You stop questioning whether you are ready. You stop overthinking every decision. You stop letting fear delay obedience. Instead, you step forward boldly, trusting that Christ in you will supply what you lack. You do not rely on your preparation alone. You rely on His presence. You dare to take risks that once terrified you. You step into unfamiliar territory, because you know you are not stepping alone. Heaven steps with you. Even your silence becomes powerful. There were times before when silence meant weakness, confusion, or fear. But now, silence becomes a sacred place where Christ in you speaks louder than words. In moments when the world expects a reaction, you carry peace. In conversations where others argue, you carry calm. Silence becomes your strength because in it, you hear His voice with clarity, and the confidence that rises from that stillness transforms the way you move through the world. Finally, you begin to live with a sense of holy inevitability, that what God has spoken over your life must come to pass because Christ in you is the guarantee. You stop doubting your path. You stop fearing the future. You begin to sense that everything is aligning toward destiny, not because of your strength, but because of His presence. Christ in you becomes your assurance, your confidence, your unshakable foundation. You begin to walk with a faith that feels like fire in your bones. There comes a deep shift in the way you handle waiting seasons when the revelation of Christ in you becomes real. Waiting no longer feels like punishment or delay. It becomes preparation. You stop pacing anxiously, wondering if God has forgotten you. Instead, you settle into a posture of trust, because you know the one who holds the future is already living inside your present. You begin to realize that waiting is not inactivity. It is spiritual strengthening. It is the place where roots grow deeper, where character is refined, where vision becomes clearer. You understand that every moment of waiting is a moment where the Christ in you is shaping you for what He is bringing you into. Your courage begins to take on a new dimension. It is no longer the temporary kind that rises in emotional moments and fades under pressure. It becomes steady, grounded, and spirit-born. This courage does not shout, it stands. It does not strive, it flows. When challenges arise, you do not collapse into panic. You lean into the Christ within you. You begin to say, if He lives in me, then this mountain must bow. And with that conviction, you face giants that once intimidated you. You walk into situations where fear used to silence you. You speak truths you once hid. This Christ-centered courage becomes a force that changes the atmosphere around you. Your dreams begin to resurrect. Those visions you buried under disappointment, fear, and self-doubt begin to breathe again when you realize Christ in you is the giver of dreams. You start to see that the desires that would not die inside you were not random. They were planted by God. Every dream that has survived your past pain now becomes a sign of divine intention. You stop treating your dreams as fantasies and begin viewing them as assignments. You carry them boldly because you understand that Christ in you does not inspire anything. He does not intend to fulfill. Your dreams stop feeling like heavy burdens and start feeling like holy invitations. When this truth matures in your heart, you begin to understand that setbacks do not signal defeat. They signal construction. Every time something falls apart, Christ in you begins building something stronger. You learn to release what God removes and embrace what He rebuilds. You stop mourning the past and start anticipating the future. You stop clinging to what no longer fits your calling. The Christ within you begins reshaping your path with divine precision. What once felt like loss begins to feel like transformation. You recognize that every setback is a doorway to a greater manifestation of His glory. This revelation also transforms your sense of spiritual authority. You no longer pray timid prayers that sound unsure or powerless. You pray like someone who understands their union with the living Christ. Your words carry a weight that shifts things in the unseen realm. You speak with clarity, conviction, and spiritual sharpness. You do not beg God to move. You declare His will boldly because you know His Spirit is already moving through you. This is not arrogance. It is alignment. It is the recognition that Christ in you desires to manifest heaven on earth through the words you speak and the faith you carry. You begin to experience breakthroughs in areas you once believed were permanent strongholds. Patterns that seemed unbreakable begin to crumble. Habits that once controlled you lose their grip. Emotional wounds that shaped your behavior begin to heal. Why? Because Christ in you is not a passive occupant. He is an active transformer. His presence confronts everything that contradicts your destiny. You start to realize that freedom is not something you chase, it is something you host. The more aware you become of His indwelling presence, the more chains fall without effort. Your voice begins to change, not its sound but its authority. You speak from a place of revelation, not insecurity. You speak from truth, not fear. Even your everyday conversations carry a tone of faith and clarity. People notice. They hear something steady, something alive, something powerful. This is Christ in you shaping your expression. Your voice becomes a vessel for encouragement, for correction when needed, for wisdom that surprises even you. You find yourself saying things you never planned, offering insight you never studied. Because the Spirit within you is speaking through your yielded tongue, your life takes on the fragrance of Christ, not through forced effort, but through genuine closeness. People begin to feel peace around you, even if you never speak a word. They sense compassion, strength, stability, and a presence they cannot explain. This is the aroma of Christ being released through your character, your actions, your choices. You stop trying to impress people and start carrying Christ to them. Your life becomes a silent sermon, one that speaks louder than any words you could craft. You begin to understand the difference between striving and yielding. Striving drains you. Yielding empowers you. When Christ in you becomes your reality, you stop trying to manufacture spiritual growth and start allowing Him to produce it. You realize that transformation is His work, not yours. You become a vessel, not a factory. You surrender, and in that surrender, supernatural strength flows. The pressure to perform fades away. The burden to prove yourself lifts. You begin to walk in grace, not exhaustion. Your perspective on obstacles changes entirely. You stop seeing them as barriers and start seeing them as training grounds. Every challenge becomes an opportunity for the Christ within you to display His power. You begin to welcome growth where you once demanded escape. You stop praying for an easier life and start praying for a stronger spirit. And Christ within you answers that prayer not by removing the obstacle, but by empowering you to rise above it. You become unshakable, not because life gets easier, but because Christ in you becomes greater. Your gratitude deepens until it becomes a spiritual posture. You start thanking God not just for what He does, but for who He is within you. Gratitude becomes a weapon. It lifts your spirit, strengthens your faith, and aligns your mind with heaven. You begin to see blessings in places you once overlooked. You thank God in advance for what He is forming inside you. Gratitude becomes your victory cry in every season. Your faith evolves from something fragile into something fierce. You begin to believe not because you see results, but because you know who lives inside you. Faith becomes your natural response to every situation. You stop treating miracles as rare and start expecting them as normal expressions of God's presence within you. You begin walking with a faith that makes the impossible bow. You trust boldly, pray boldly, act boldly. Because Christ in you is the foundation of your belief, your destiny becomes unstoppable when Christ in you becomes your identity. Nothing external can sabotage a person whose inner world is governed by Christ. Delay cannot stop you. Criticism cannot intimidate you. Failure cannot paralyze you. Fear cannot silence you. You carry a divine resilience that keeps pushing, keeps growing, keeps rising. You begin to sense that every step you take is guided by a purpose far bigger than your own understanding. And as Christ in you becomes the center of your life, you begin to live with an eternal perspective. You stop being consumed by temporary troubles. You stop clinging to what does not last. Your heart becomes anchored in things unseen, things eternal, things divine. And this eternal awareness shapes everything. Your decisions, your relationships, your purpose, your courage. There comes a moment when the revelation of Christ in you becomes so real that even your failures cannot shake your confidence. You begin to see failure not as a verdict but as a lesson, not as a wall but as a doorway. You understand that Christ within you does not abandon you when you stumble. He strengthens you through the stumble. You stop allowing mistakes to define you or derail you. Instead, you rise faster, stronger, and wiser each time because you carry a presence that cannot be defeated. You begin to see that progress is inevitable when Christ is your source. Even when you fall, grace lifts you, realigns you, and pushes you forward with renewed purpose. Your relationships deepen because the Christ in you transforms how you connect with others. You no longer approach people with guarded suspicion or fearful distance. You approach them with courage, compassion, and clarity. You listen more than you speak, not out of weakness but out of spiritual sensitivity. You begin to recognize the divine value in every person you meet. You honor people not because they are perfect, but because Christ within you sees them through eyes of redemption. You become a carrier of peace in conversations, a source of encouragement in conflict, and a voice of truth when confusion surrounds those you love. You begin to see purpose in pain, not as something to glorify, but as something Christ within you redeems. Pain no longer feels pointless or wasted. You recognize that God does not send all pain, but He uses all pain. Every wound becomes a place for Christ to demonstrate His healing power. Every tear becomes a seed for future strength. Every heartbreak becomes a birthplace for deeper compassion. You no longer break under the weight of disappointment. You bloom beneath it. Christ in you turns pain into wisdom, sorrow into strength, and weakness into testimony. Your level of discernment increases dramatically. You begin to sense things you once ignored. You pick up on spiritual atmospheres, motives, and directions with surprising clarity. This is not suspicion. This is the Spirit within you guiding your steps. You begin to avoid connections that drain you and embrace those that align with God's purpose. You stop running toward every opportunity and start moving only toward what carries the signature of heaven. Christ in you becomes your compass, steering you away from confusion and into divine alignment. You develop a resilience that surprises even yourself. Situations that once crushed you no longer have the same power. You walk through storms with a calm that makes others wonder what you know. And what you know is this: Christ in you is unshakable. No matter how fierce the winds, no matter how loud the thunder, no matter how dark the clouds, the presence within you remains steady. You begin to live with a confidence that is not fragile, not emotional, not inconsistent, but anchored in the unmovable Christ dwelling within your spirit. Your prayer life becomes a fire that cannot be contained. You stop praying safe prayers. You stop praying small prayers. You stop praying prayers that merely maintain your life. You begin praying prayers that transform it. Your prayers carry authority, conviction, and spiritual voltage. You pray like someone who understands that Christ is speaking through you. Heaven begins to respond because heaven recognizes the voice of Christ flowing from your surrendered heart. Your prayer language becomes powerful, prophetic, and purpose-filled. Your decisions become sharper. You stop choosing based on fear, pressure, or insecurity. You choose based on alignment with Christ within you. You begin asking different questions, not, "What will people think?" or, "What if I fail?" but, "Does this honor the Christ in me?" That shift changes everything. You stop stepping into relationships that move you backward. You stop engaging in opportunities that drain your calling. You begin making decisions that elevate your life, sharpen your spirit, and move you closer to the destiny God prepared for you before the foundation of the world. Your sense of spiritual boldness becomes contagious. People around you begin to see a version of you they never saw before, a version that walks with clarity, speaks with conviction, and leads with purpose. You become an example of what happens when a person truly awakens to the Christ within them. Your life becomes proof that ordinary people can carry extraordinary power. Others begin to feel permission to rise because they see you rising. Your faith becomes a spark that ignites faith in others. You begin to understand that the presence of Christ in you is not meant to be hidden. It is meant to shine. You stop apologizing for your calling. You stop dimming your light to make others comfortable. You stop minimizing your gifts to avoid attention. You begin walking boldly, not for your glory, but for His. The Christ within you is meant to be seen, heard, and felt wherever you go. And when you allow Him to shine, lives begin to change without you even trying. You develop a holy confidence, not arrogance, not pride, but assurance rooted in Christ. You stop second-guessing every choice. You stop doubting your worth. You stop questioning whether God can use you. You know He can. You know He will. You know He already is. Christ in you becomes your confidence, your clarity, your courage. You walk with a lifted head not because of who you are, but because of who He is within you. Your vision for the future expands. You stop seeing limitations. You start seeing possibilities. You begin to dream at a level that scares the old version of you. You start believing for things your past self never even considered. You envision impact, influence, transformation, and legacy, not because you are chasing greatness, but because greatness lives within you. Christ in you enlarges your dreams until they match the size of the God who designed them. Your everyday life becomes a partnership with God. Walking to work becomes ministry. Talking with a friend becomes ministry. Moments of silence become ministry. Everything becomes an opportunity to reveal the Christ within you. You no longer divide life into spiritual and ordinary. Everything is sacred because Christ is present in everything you do. This awareness makes your entire life a testimony of divine union. You begin to sense the weight of destiny, not as pressure but as privilege. You understand that your life is not random, that your existence is not accidental. Every breath you breathe carries purpose. Christ in you becomes the guarantee that your life will matter, your impact will be real, and your story will glorify God. You begin walking with seriousness and joy, knowing that heaven is writing through your steps. You reach a point where you can no longer live small. You refuse to shrink. You refuse to retreat. You refuse to settle for a life beneath the calling God placed within you. Christ in you demands expansion, boldness, growth, courage, and obedience. You begin to rise, not slowly, not hesitantly, but boldly, because you finally understand that you were created to reveal His glory on the earth. You stop living as though you are powerless and start living as though the King of Glory truly dwells within you. And finally, you realize that the mystery of Christ in you is not just a revelation to understand. It is a life to embody. You wake each day aware that heaven lives inside your humanity. You move knowing that glory walks within your steps. You speak knowing that eternity echoes through your voice. Your life becomes a living expression of divine union. And as this truth becomes your reality, you step into the world with fire in your spirit, purpose in your soul, and Christ shining through every part of your being.